Ruger didn't lead Cal toward safety that night. He dragged him toward a truth no one in the desert wanted uncovered. And when the men with rifles came to erase everything, Cal realized something terrifying. The dog hadn't been warning him about danger at all. He'd been warning him about a secret buried under frozen sand. A secret worth killing for. If a dog trusts his instinct, what choice does a man have but to follow? The desert didn't greet Cal Mason. It watched him. Heat rippled off the highway as his old F-150 rolled into Dry Mesa, Arizona, a town so small the wind seemed to know every door it passed. The place looked sunburned and tired, leaning into the kind of quiet that made a man check his rearview mirror twice. Cal had seen a lot of silences in his life, but this one had intention, a held breath. Ruger sat upright in the passenger seat, a grey and tan wall of muscle and instinct, ears forward, eyes fixed on the sun-blasted horizon. He didn't pant. He didn't fidget. He assessed, the way only a working dog who'd smelled danger on 3 continents knew how. Cal pulled up to the county annex where the foreclosure auction was being held. The building looked like it had melted into the sand decades ago. Flaking paint, warped door frame. Inside, the air had the stale weight of resignation. Locals sat in metal folding chairs, hats low, arms crossed. The temperature dropped a few degrees the moment Ruger stepped in beside Cal. People didn't flinch exactly, but their attention snagged on the dog before sliding away again, uneasy. The auctioneer spoke through a microphone that didn't need to exist in a room that small. Tools, fencing, a busted ATV, nothing worth remembering. Cal only lifted his eyes when the final item flashed on the projector. Parcel 12B, desert cabin, structural damage, no power, no plumbing, 15 years unpaid tax. The room tightened. Not visibly, but enough for a man like Cal to feel it. Conversation stopped mid-word. Someone cleared his throat too loudly. An old woman traced the rim of her cup without blinking. $500. The auctioneer said. Start there. No hands, no whispers. Even the air pulled back. Ruger nudged Cal's knee once, a signal, not pushy, not eager, just a quiet pressure that said, "Pay attention." Cal raised his hand. Sold. It took 3 seconds. 3 long, wrong seconds. And when the gavel hit, every stare in the room latched onto him like he had walked into a story already in progress. At the clerk's table, a thin man in a bolo tie slid the papers across the counter without meeting Cal's gaze. Ruger stood behind his left leg, tall and still, scanning. "You're buying that?" the clerk asked, voice low. "If the paperwork's right," Cal replied. The clerk swallowed. "It's right. Doesn't mean it's good." Ruger's ears twitched. A subtle flick, so small most people would miss it. Cal didn't. Outside, heat swallowed them again. Cal loaded the documents into his glove box, then drove out of town towards the cabin. The desert stretched endlessly, a wash of cinnamon sand and jagged rock. But as they got closer, the air cooled unnaturally, as if the land itself was exhaling frost. When Cal parked beside the cabin, Ruger didn't jump out immediately. He stepped down slow, deliberate, nose moving with surgical precision. Cal followed his gaze. The cabin sat crooked against a rise of red stone, a skeleton of weathered boards and rusted nails. But beneath it, the ground was wrong. Sand didn't hold cold like that, not in this part of Arizona, yet when Cal crouched and pressed his palm to the earth, it felt chilled, not shaded, not cooled by wind, cold like something that had never thawed. Ruger planted all 4 paws, hackles raised just enough to whisper a warning. His body leaned forward, weight shifting to his toes, nose locked on a small patch of sand near the cabin's foundation. "Talk to me?" Cal murmured. Ruger didn't bark. The dog rarely wasted sound. Instead, he edged forward and tapped the sand once with his paw. Tap, hold, stare. It was the same pattern he used years ago near a collapsed school in Helmand Province, right before Cal discovered an underground tunnel system no satellite had detected. Back then, Ruger had saved a squad. Now the look in his eyes was even sharper, a message stripped of doubt. Something's here. Cal scraped the top layer of sand aside. It crumbled like frost on metal. Beneath it, just visible, was a dull silver edge. Metallic. Straight. Too exact to be natural. A buried plate. He brushed more sand away. The surface expanded, 2 feet wide. 3. Ruger's breathing slowed, deepened, as if matching the pulse of the thing beneath them. Footsteps broke the silence. Cal stood up fast. A man in a dusty work jacket had appeared at the tree line, watching him. Greybeard, weather-chapped face, eyes that had seen too much sun and one thing they wished they never had. "You bought that cabin, didn't you?" the man said. Cal didn't answer. The man shook his head once. That place should have stayed forgotten. Ruger stepped forward, inserting himself between Cal and the stranger, tail straight, chest lifted. The man lifted his hands slightly, respectful, but wary. "That dog knows. They always know before we do." Before Cal could reply, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the heat shimmer as quickly as he had arrived. Cal looked down. Ruger was still locked onto the metal plate, muscles taut. "What did you find, boy?" No sound, just certainty. And somewhere deep under that frozen sand, something shifted. A faint, hollow echo, like metal settling, or something waking up after a very long sleep. Cal exhaled slowly. The desert wasn't empty, and whatever Ruger had found beneath that cabin wasn't done breathing yet. The desert changed after sunset. Heat bled out of the sand until the whole world felt brittle, as if one wrong step might crack it open. Cal Mason had seen nights like this overseas, nights when the air itself felt thinner, sharper, full of things a man couldn't name. But here, in Arizona, he expected quiet. Ruger did not. The dog moved differently now, not restless, not agitated, focused, every motion clean, deliberate. He circled the corner of the cabin with the same patience he once used clearing abandoned compounds in Kandahar. Nose low, ears cupped forward. A slow inhale, then another. He stopped at one of the main support posts, pressed his snout deep into the sand, held it there. Cal stepped closer. Ruger didn't move, didn't look back. It was the stillness that made Cal's chest tighten. He knew this posture. The pause before a bark. The pause before a warning. "Talk to me," Cal said quietly. Ruger lifted his head an inch, just enough for Cal to catch the change in his breathing. A shallow draw, a second, then a deep exhale as if confirming something invisible. The dog placed his front paw on the sand beside the support post, not tapping this time. Firm, claiming the spot. Cal crouched. The sand here was colder than the patch he found earlier. A thin crust of frost clung to the grains. Frost, in a desert that had been roasting an hour ago. Something under us is keeping the ground cold, Cal murmured. Ruger shifted his weight. His tail straightened horizontally, a line of tension. His ears angled sharply to the left, pointing at nothing Cal could hear. It wasn't a sound in human range. It was a frequency only instinct could register. For a moment, Cal was back on a dusty road outside Musa Kala, Ruger freezing in the exact same stance. A single second of stillness before the dog backed up and pressed against his leg. That warning saved 6 men from stepping onto pressure plates buried under loose gravel. The memory tightened Cal's throat. Ruger turned his head suddenly and looked at him, a long, unblinking look, asking for a decision. Cal brushed the sand away from the post. A few inches down, something metallic caught the moonlight. Another buried surface. Smooth, Man-made, larger than the plate he'd found earlier. A pattern was emerging, and Ruger had seen it miles before Cal did. He exhaled slowly. You always were first to know, buddy. Ruger didn't break eye contact. Another inhale, another stillness. Then he stood up straight and walked a few paces back, facing the cabin like a soldier taking position. His chest lifted, his body stayed rigid, and his eyes stayed fixed on the foundation, as if waiting for movement. Cal followed his gaze. Nothing shifted. Nothing sounded out of place. But the air had weight now. Pressure. All right, Cal whispered. We check it in the morning. Ruger didn't relax. Night settled fully, drawing long shadows across the cabin walls. Cal built a small fire outside and sat with his back against the porch beam, Ruger beside him. The desert was silent except for the occasional brush of wind against scrub grass. Too silent. Ruger's hackles rose once, briefly. Then settled. You see something? Cal asked. The dog didn't answer. His eyes tracked the darkness like it carried language. Hours passed. Cal tried to sleep inside the cabin on the weathered cot. Ruger curled at the doorway, blocking the entrance with his body. The moon climbed. The boards creaked with the chill. Cal drifted in and out, listening for anything that broke the rhythm of night. It came just after midnight. A single bark. Short, sharp, absolute. The kind Ruger used only when nothing else would do, when he needed Cal awake now. Cal shot upright, hand on his knife before conscious thought caught up. Ruger stood silhouetted against the open doorway, head low, body locked. His tail was still, his breathing silent. What do you hear? Cal whispered. Ruger stepped into the open desert, paws sinking into the cold sand. He sniffed once, twice. Then he looked back at Cal, eyes reflecting the moonlight like shards of glass. It wasn't fear. It was confirmation. Something out there had moved. Something under them had stirred. Something the dog recognized long before the man did. Cal grabbed his boots, slipped into his jacket, and followed Ruger to the edge of the clearing. The sand bore no fresh prints. The wind didn't carry a new scent. But the cold in the ground was deeper now, radiating outward in a thin circle. Like something beneath the cabin had changed temperature. Ruger lowered his head again, ears tightening forward until every muscle in his body aligned with a single direction. Under us, Cal whispered. Ruger didn't look away. You're telling me something's down there. The dog exhaled once, slow and certain. Cal felt it then, a faint tremor beneath the sand. Not enough to alarm a normal person, but enough to wake a soldier who once learned to sleep through artillery and still hear the click of a buried trigger. It lasted 1 second. Maybe less. Ruger lifted his head. The tension in him changed. Not warning now. Recognition. Cal swallowed. He crouched and touched the sand again. The cold had spread nearly a foot farther than before. Something was alive down there, not breathing, not moving, but awake. Ruger stepped close, pressed his shoulder to Cal's leg. Not fear, not reassurance. Partnership, Cal whispered into the night. We dig at first light. Ruger didn't bark again. He didn't need to. By sunrise, the cold spot beneath the cabin felt even colder. Cal Mason crouched beside the support post Ruger had marked, letting the morning light spill across the sand. Something about the air tasted metallic. Old. Wrong. Ruger stood a few feet away, watching every movement with the unwavering focus of a dog whose instincts had outlived war. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't restless. He was patient, like he knew what Cal was about to touch had been waiting for years. All right, buddy, Cal murmured. Show me again. Ruger moved without hesitation. He walked to the exact patch of sand where he'd barked the night before, lowered his head, sniffed once, and placed his paw firmly on the spot. Same place. Same stillness. Same warning. Cal took the hint. He grabbed a short shovel from the truck and began digging. The first few inches came up easily. Loose sand, dry grains, normal. But the deeper he dug, the stranger the feeling became. The soil below wasn't warm like the upper layers. It grew colder with every scoop, as though the desert had swallowed a piece of winter and never let it go. Sweat rolled between Cal's shoulder blades despite the chill. He kept digging until the metal edge gleamed through the sand. Smooth. Too smooth to be scrap. He brushed the rest away with his gloved hand. A flat steel surface. Rectangular. Wide. Perfectly aligned to the cabin's footprint. A hatch. Ruger stepped closer, head tilted, ears raised high. He inhaled sharply, then pulled back half a step, not out of fear but recognition. Like he had smelled this before. Like something from his training days, from compounds where the walls hummed with secrets. Cal tapped the metal with the handle of the shovel. The sound echoed, hollow. A long, empty thud. Not solid ground, not rock. A void, something beneath it. He swallowed. You've got to be kidding me. The cabin had been listed as abandoned, worthless, not worth more than $500. But a hidden hatch under the foundation meant intention. Meant engineering. Meant someone had buried something that did not belong in the middle of the desert. Ruger suddenly jerked to the left, nose to the sand. He pawed once and pulled something free with his teeth, backing up to drop it into Cal's hands. Cal froze. It was a strip of nylon fabric, sun-bleached but intact. Olive green, frayed at the edges, the kind used in military gear bags. A faded code number ran along one side, but the middle section had been blacked out with a thick line of ink, not worn off, deliberately erased. Cal's breath tightened. Ruger stood over him, silent, waiting. The dog wasn't acting out of curiosity. His body posture was command level, alert, directive. This wasn't a dog finding a random scrap of cloth. This was a dog identifying evidence. Cal turned the nylon over. A faint smell of oil clung to it. Machine lubricant. Industrial. Not desert. All right. Cal whispered. What the hell were they storing out here? Before Ruger could react, a sudden thud hit the underside of the hatch. Cal jerked back. Ruger barked, loud and sharp, then lowered into a defensive crouch, teeth bared. The sound wasn't like metal settling. It was deliberate. A strike. Something below hitting upward. Cal froze. He listened. Silence. Then another muffled sound. Not loud, not continuous, a shifting, a scrape. As if something had moved after years of stillness. Ruger growled low. The same sound he used when a buried tripwire trembled beneath the dirt. His paws dug into the sand, bracing his body. Cal's heartbeat picked up. Something was beneath them, and whatever it was, Ruger had sensed it long, before any sound reached human ears. He moved around the hatch, scanning for seams or hinges. The metal was old but thick, bolted into concrete below. Whoever had installed it had expected no one to find it easily. Ruger barked again. A shorter bark this time. Urgent. Warning. And then Ruger did something Cal hadn't seen him do in years. He backed up and blocked Cal with his body. Not in fear. In protection. Cal crouched beside him. Easy, boy. I'm not opening it yet. Ruger's breathing steadied, but his eyes stayed on the hatch. The desert wind shifted. For a brief second, Cal thought he smelled something faint rising from between the metal seams. Chemical. Sterile. Not natural. He stood and scanned the horizon. Empty sand. Empty sky. But something inside him clicked into the same gear Ruger had been in since yesterday. The cabin wasn't just neglected. It had been abandoned with purpose. And someone had gone through the trouble of erasing the military identifier on the nylon strip, because whatever had been stored under that hatch wasn't meant to be found. Ruger looked up at him, eyes sharp and waiting. Cal spoke softly, This place isn't what they said it was. Ruger touched his nose to the hatch, then stepped back again. A gesture as clear as words. Dig deeper, but not yet. Cal nodded once, feeling the same cold settle into his gut as into the desert floor. "We will," he said. "But we're not alone out here, are we?" Ruger didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. Dry Mesa's public library was smaller than most gas stations Cal Mason had stopped at during convoys overseas. A bell jingled over the door as he stepped inside. Ruger at his heel, the dog's presence filling the cramped room with a quiet authority. Dust curled in sunlight, spilling across metal shelves, and an old swamp cooler rattled somewhere in the back. A woman with half-moon glasses glanced up from her desk. Most people looked at Ruger first. She looked at Cal. "You're the one who bought the cabin out on Ridgeback Wash," she said. Cal nodded. Her tone held neither welcome nor concern. More like resignation. "I need records," Cal said. "Old property maps, any research notes, missing persons, anything tied to that area." Her gaze sharpened. People don't usually ask questions about that part of the desert. Ruger stopped beside Cal's leg, ears tilted forward, picking up the tension before Cal did. Cal kept his voice steady. "I'm not most people." The woman hesitated, then walked into a back room. When she returned, she carried a thin binder, warped by heat. She set it on the counter, flipping carefully through yellowed pages. "There was a man," she said quietly. "A government scientist. Meteorological division. Worked on atmospheric chemical dispersal models. Big words for cloud and wind studies. He rented that cabin for months. Then one day, gone." Cal leaned in. "When? About 20 years now. Folks assumed he slipped trying to cross the wash after a storm. But I remember the sheriff back then. He didn't think it was weather that took him. He thought someone made him disappear." Cal felt Ruger shift at his side, as if the dog sensed the direction the truth was turning. The librarian lowered her voice. "Rumor was he found something in the desert he wasn't supposed to. Some kind of data. Something the county or somebody above the county wanted buried." "What kind of data?" She closed the binder, the kind no one writes down twice. Cal thanked her and stepped outside. Ruger followed, shaking dust from his coat. The wind had picked up, pushing hot air across the gravel. Cal walked toward the truck, but an older man leaning against a post caught his eye. "You're wasting your time with books," he called out. Cal stopped. Ruger moved half a step closer to the man, not aggressive, but evaluating. The old man's eyes flicked to the dog, and he straightened subtly. "Respect." The man nodded at the truck. "Local talk says you found something under that cabin." Cal kept his stance relaxed. "People talk a lot. This time they're talking careful," the man replied. "That cabin, son, it was never meant for living. It was a cover. A station for weather sampling is the official story. But folks around here heard engines underground some nights, and once bright lights under the sand, like the earth was breathing." Cal felt the air shift, his instincts aligning with Ruger's still posture. "A story," he said. The man shook his head. "Not a story, a warning." Then he walked away, leaving Cal with the kind of silence that sticks. On the drive back, Ruger sat stiff in the passenger seat, nose twitching at every gust of wind. He rarely behaved like this unless something nearby was alive in the wrong way. When they reached the cabin, the feeling hit immediately. The front door stood open. "The wind didn't open that," Cal whispered. Ruger was out of the truck before the engine died, silent as a shadow, body low but powerful, a line of muscle ready to strike. Cal followed carefully, scanning the sandy ground for footprints. None. Whoever came knew how to move without leaving tracks. Inside, the cabin felt different. Violated. Drawers half open. Footprints in the dust on the table. A broken jar near the counter. But nothing was stolen. Not the tools, not Cal's gear, not even the cash in the tin box. They weren't looking for valuables, they were looking for the hatch. Ruger padded toward the back wall where the floor met the foundation. He sniffed along the boards, then gave a low grumble, 1 octave above a growl. He moved with certainty straight to the spot where the sand had been disturbed yesterday. Cal knelt next to him. The sand was smoother than before. Someone had brushed it, tried to hide their tracks. But Ruger's nose followed the ghost of a scent, tracing it toward the far corner. He stopped, stood perfectly still, then slowly lifted his head toward the window. Cal froze. Someone had been watching from outside, and not long ago he recognized the feeling in Ruger's stance. It wasn't fear. It was the same bracing posture the dog used when something hostile lingered in the air, but chose not to strike yet. Cal whispered, "What did they want?" Ruger stepped closer to him, placing his shoulder against Cal's knee as if anchoring him to the answer. They wanted what was buried. A sudden glint caught Cal's eye. Something under the cot. He crouched and reached for a small object wedged beneath the frame. A steel button. Not from his clothes. Not from anything he owned. Military issue. His pulse tightened. Ruger leaned in, nose working the metal. He stiffened, then looked sharply toward the desert beyond the cabin door. Cal slipped the button into his pocket. "They're not done," he said quietly. Ruger huffed once in response, a sound of agreement. The desert outside seemed to press closer, the wind carrying a thin, unfamiliar hum. A signal, a vibration, something moving beneath the sand, or someone waiting for night to fall. Cal locked the door, though he knew it wouldn't matter. He knelt beside Ruger, resting a hand on the dog's back, feeling the steady, coiled strength beneath his palm. "Whatever's coming, we face it together." Ruger lifted his head, eyes sharp as desert glass. Something in the darkness answered, not with a sound, but with a presence. The cabin wasn't abandoned. It had been reawakened. Morning came thin and pale, a washed-out ribbon across the desert horizon. Cal Mason stood over the buried metal plate Ruger had found, crowbar in hand, breath steady but tight. The sand around the hatch was colder than ever, as if the night had pulled heat from everything except the steel beneath their feet. Ruger positioned himself behind Cal, body angled toward the open desert, guarding their backs. His ears flicked at every shift in the wind. The dog didn't need words to communicate. His stillness said enough. Something under that hatch mattered, and something out there wanted it. Cal slid the crowbar beneath the metal lip. The hatch resisted first, groaning with the stiffness of decades. He pressed harder. Rust cracked. Bolts snapped with sharp metallic pops. Ruger's head lifted at each one, alert but calm. This wasn't the chaos he feared. This was the calm before a truth. With one final push, the hatch broke loose. A gust of cold air blasted upward. Cal staggered back. Ruger planted himself between Cal and the opening. The air wasn't just cold, it was controlled, preserved. The kind of cold that belonged in research labs, not in a forgotten desert cabin. Cal crouched beside Ruger, letting the dog sniff the air. Ruger didn't recoil, but he didn't relax either. His tail stiffened, not in fear, in vigilance. "Let's see what they left behind," Cal said softly. He lowered a lantern and climbed down the narrow ladder into the chamber below. The temperature dropped instantly, biting his skin. The room was no bigger than a walk-in pantry. Concrete walls. Sealed vents. A hum of electricity long dead but somehow echoing in the silence. On a metal table rested 3 objects, each arranged with deliberate precision. Someone had prepared this room for safekeeping, not abandonment. A steel case, a notebook, a frozen hard drive encased in frost. Ruger paced above, his claws tapping lightly on the metal rim, hesitant to leave his post. Cal set the lantern on the table and opened the steel case. Inside, wrapped in protective foam, lay a toxicology sensor array. Industrial grade, capable of identifying airborne chemical traces within microseconds, the kind used in classified environmental testing. He recognized it immediately. This wasn't just meteorology. This was contamination analysis. He lifted the notebook next. Leather-bound, edges cracked. The handwriting inside was tight, deliberate, written by someone who knew he wasn't documenting a theory. He was building a warning. Cal skimmed the first pages. Ruger remained above the hatch, refusing to move. Guarding. Claiming the threshold as if he knew. Once Cal crossed back into the sunlight, they wouldn't be alone. The entries told a story Cal didn't want to believe. Tests initiated under contract with Helios Energy. Experimental dispersal of solvent particulates to break down subterranean rock layers. Unintended consequences. Poisoned aquifers. Dead wildlife. Accelerated erosion. Structural destabilization of desert terrain. Then the writing shifted. More frantic. Less patient. They said they would stop. They did not. They buried the tests and the data. They buried the sickness spreading beneath the sand. Cal flipped further. I installed a hard drive with raw footage and analytics in the cold chamber. If anything happens to me, it survives. If they come for me, they will not find it easily. Truth deserves breath. Cal paused at the next line. It felt like the writer was speaking directly to him. If you find this, I did not walk into the desert. They made me disappear. Ruger barked once above him. Short, sharp warning. Cal set the notebook down. He grabbed the hard drive. Its frost clung to his fingers, numbing them instantly. This wasn't environmental cold. This was engineered. A drive kept frozen to protect sensitive data. Ruger barked again, louder. I hear you, Cal whispered. He climbed out quickly, pulling the hatch shut behind him. The sun was higher now, but the world felt dimmer. Ruger moved close, pressing against his leg, guiding him away from the cabin wall. Cal scanned the interior of the cabin. Someone had returned. The bed was shifted 2 inches from where Cal left it. A drawer was now half open. A dust pattern on the floor broken by a shoe print attempting to disguise itself. He knelt. Ruger stepped beside him, nose hovering inches from the track. Fresh, Cal murmured. Hours at most. Ruger's body stiffened. He moved to the far corner of the cabin where a sliver of sunlight slipped through a warped plank. He sniffed once, then gave a low rumble from deep in his chest. Cal followed his gaze. Outside, footprints circled the cabin, faint but visible. Someone had walked slow, careful, watching, had come close enough to press a face against the cabin slats and listen. Ruger stepped to the open doorway and sat, blocking it fully. His silhouette filled the frame, ears forward, tail still. He wasn't just guarding, he was claiming the space, telling anyone watching that crossing the threshold meant crossing him. Cal set the notebook and drive gently on the table. This scientist wasn't just hiding research. Cal whispered. He was hiding evidence of a crime. Ruger looked back at him, eyes sharp, resolute. And he didn't vanish by accident. Wind hissed against the boards. Something out in the desert clicked softly. A camera shutter, a scope, a signal. Cal grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber, then moved beside Ruger. The truth under that hatch had been untouched for 20 years, and now someone knew it had surfaced. The wind carried a strange silence that evening, the kind that made the desert feel less like empty land and more like a witness holding its breath. Cal stepped outside with Ruger close behind, scanning the fading horizon. The last light of day broke across the dunes, turning the sand into fading gold. And then he saw it. A black SUV sat half-hidden behind a ridge, its windows tinted, engine off, parked too far to be casual and too close to be harmless. No dust trail, no tracks leading away. Whoever drove it was still nearby. Ruger froze at Cal's side. His body tightened, nose lifted, reading the air. His stare locked on the shadowed ridge as if he saw what Cal couldn't. His growl was barely audible, but it vibrated through the ground beneath them. Cal placed a hand on Ruger's shoulder. "You see them too." Ruger didn't look away. Cal backed toward the cabin slowly, never breaking his line of sight with the ridge. If the corporation had sent someone, they weren't here to talk. Not after the files he'd found. Not after someone already ransacked his cabin. Inside, he double-checked the firearm he kept beside the door. Ruger stayed alert, pacing in slow, controlled steps. His ears were tuned like instruments to a frequency only he could hear. Night settled fast in the desert, wrapping the cabin in darkness. The lantern cast thin, trembling light across the walls. Cal waited. Ruger waited with him, lying low but coiled with readiness. Then came the sound, a soft disturbance outside, sand shifting beneath cautious feet. Ruger rose silently. No bark, no growl, pure instinct. Cal reached instinctively for the lantern and snuffed it with his palm. Darkness swallowed them whole. Ruger stepped toward the door, positioning himself between Cal and the approaching threat. His breathing was steady, controlled. Cal had seen him like this only twice before, once in Helmand Province, once when they had tracked an insurgent through a bombed-out school. Both times Ruger had been right. A faint click against metal, the door latch. Cal steadied his rifle. The door cracked open, and a sliver of desert moonlight spilled across the floor. A masked figure slipped inside. No hesitation. Ruger launched. He hit the intruder with full force, jaws locking on the man's forearm. The attacker screamed, stumbling back into the doorframe. Cal saw a second intruder shadowing the first, raising a pistol toward him. Cal squeezed a shot into the wall beside them. A deliberate miss. A warning. The pistol jerked, the gunman startled. Ruger yanked the first man sideways, teeth sunk deep, dragging him off balance. The second intruder lunged toward Cal. In the chaos, the gun went off, the bullet slicing the air inches from Cal's shoulder. He fired again, this time low, shattering the plank near the man's leg. Splinters burst upward. The intruder scrambled backward, tripping over the threshold. Then a third sound split the night. Glass breaking. A bottle crashed through the window. Flames burst across the wood floor, hungry and fast. Ruger released the attacker and leapt toward Cal as fire spread. Instantly, smoke thickened the air, pushing upward towards the ceiling. Heat slammed into the room, violent and sudden. Cal hauled Ruger back from the flames. The masked men fled into the darkness, one clutching a bleeding arm, the other stumbling toward the SUV. Its engine roared to life. "They're burning us out," Cal muttered. Ruger barked once, sharp and commanding, as if to say, "Move now." Cal grabbed the evidence box from the table, but Ruger was already ahead of him. The dog clamped his teeth around the steel handle, dragging the box toward the open doorway with surprising strength. Flames consumed the far wall, racing across the cabin faster than Cal expected. Ruger pulled again, muscles straining. Cal cleared debris from the door and shoved it wide. Smoke billowed out, spiraling into the cold desert air. "Come on, Ruger, go!" The dog burst through the doorway, the steel case scraping across the dirt behind him. Cal followed, coughing, eyes burning from smoke. The fire behind them roared, spitting embers into the night. Outside, the desert wind howled. Cal and Ruger ran until they reached the edge of the clearing. There, Ruger dropped the steel case at Cal's feet and turned back toward the cabin. "No," Cal whispered. "It's gone." The flames devoured the roof. Wooden beams collapsed inward. The cabin Cal had hoped to rebuild, hoped to call home, was turning to ash before his eyes. A lifetime of desert secrets burned along with it. But the truth survived. because Ruger had saved it. Cal knelt beside the dog and placed a hand on his neck. Ruger leaned into him, chest heaving but eyes sharp. "You knew exactly what mattered," Cal said. The black SUV sped away across the ridge, disappearing into the night as the cabin collapsed in a violent shudder. Ruger didn't look at the fire. He looked into the darkness where the SUV vanished. Watching, listening, tracking, waiting for the next move. Cal lifted the steel case. "First shot fired," he murmured. Ruger pressed against him, steady and fierce. And the desert, for the first time since Cal arrived, no longer felt empty. It felt like a battlefield awakening. The fire from the cabin still glowed faintly on the horizon when Cal and Ruger reached the truck. The steel evidence case sat between them, its weight more than metal. It was a fuse waiting for the right hands to light it. Cal gripped the wheel, knuckles white. He had one name in mind. One person he trusted to carry a truth that powerful. Mara Delgado, a war correspondent with scars that still echoed on her skin from the day he had dragged her out of a shelled-out street in Kunduz. She owed him her life once, but trust wasn't built on debts. It was built on what people did when the world demanded courage. Ruger lay in the passenger seat, eyes never fully closing, body tight as if expecting another attack. Cal reached over and rested a hand on Ruger's shoulder. The dog exhaled slowly, grounding both of them. "We move now, Ruger," Cal said. "No one else gets to die over this." The truck tore across the desert highway, wind slicing through shattered silence. Cal kept checking the mirrors, watching for headlights. None appeared, but someone else was watching the road. Miles behind them, under the dying orange glow of the burning cabin, Reeves sat on the hood of the black SUV. His mask was off, his breath shaking. The others had fled. He had stayed. Not by orders, because something Ruger had done shook him. Reeves replayed it in his mind. The moment during the fight when the dog had lunged at everyone except him. There had been a split second when Ruger had him in full view, unguarded, close enough for a fatal bite. But Ruger had stopped. He had turned away. Reeves had spent his life reading danger, learning how to hide intent behind action. But dogs didn't read lies. They read people. And in that moment, Ruger saw the truth he didn't want to admit. He hadn't wanted to kill anyone. Not Cal. Not even the dog. Reeves ran a hand across his face, breath unsteady. Maybe the corporation didn't see him as a threat to Cal Mason. But Ruger did. Ruger saw him clearly. And that terrified him more than a gun ever had. Back on the road, Cal turned off into a narrow dirt trail, heading toward a cluster of mesas where Mara kept a small off-grid cabin for writing. The night pressed in on them, thick and silent. The desert had a way of swallowing sound, leaving only instinct. Ruger suddenly lifted his head. He growled once, low. Cal slowed the truck immediately. He trusted that sound the way he trusted gravity. Ruger stared ahead, then to the right, then back at Cal. Not warning? Not fear? A signal? "Someone's here," Cal whispered. He cut the engine. The desert fell into dead quiet. Ruger hopped down, landing silently. He moved in a low, sweeping arc, nose near the ground, body angled toward whatever he sensed. Cal followed with the rifle. A shadow moved near the rocks. Cal raised the weapon. Ruger stepped in front of him. "What are you doing?" Cal hissed. Ruger didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply planted himself between Cal and the figure stepping into the moonlight. Reeves raised both hands slowly. "I'm unarmed," he said. The moon caught his face, revealing exhaustion more than threat. "I'm not here to finish anything. I'm done with them." Cal kept the rifle trained, but something in Ruger's stance softened. His body unwound from its defensive coil. He didn't move toward Reeves, but he didn't block Cal anymore. "He's telling the truth," Cal murmured. Reeves let out a bitter laugh. "Good to know I've got a dog vouching for me." What do you want? Cal demanded. Reeves swallowed hard, glancing down. They're not stopping, Mason. Burning your cabin wasn't the end. It was the beginning. They want you gone before sunrise? Ruger watched the man closely, ears shifting at every tremor in his voice. The dog stepped forward once, sniffing the air around Reeves, then looked back at Cal. No tension, no warning. Ruger knew. Reeves wasn't lying. Cal lowered the rifle a fraction. You're part of that team. You burned my home. Reeves flinched. I didn't light the fire, and I didn't fire a bullet at you. His gaze flicked to Ruger. He didn't attack me because he knew I wasn't going to. The desert wind carried their silence. Reeves stepped forward just enough to show his resolve. I can get you 20 minutes, that's all. They'll track you, but I can mislead them. If you get to wherever you're going, get there fast. Cal's jaw tightened. He didn't trust the man. Not fully. But Ruger's instincts had never failed him. Reeves took a breath. Who are you giving the evidence to? Cal didn't answer. He didn't need to. Reeves nodded as if he'd already guessed. The journalist, Mara Delgado. Reeves stepped back. Then go. Now, before they cut off the highway. Cal watched him disappear into the stones. When the sound faded, he looked down at Ruger. You spared him, Cal whispered. Why? Ruger didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. He touched his nose gently to Cal's leg, then looked toward the mesa where Mara lived. It was time. Cal started the truck. They drove into the darkness, racing toward the one person who could turn evidence into truth. Behind them, Reeves stood unseen on the ridge, watching the taillights fade. Something in him had shifted. A dog had looked at him and seen the part of him he had buried, the part that might yet choose the right side before dawn. The desert at night looked asleep, but Cal knew better. Nothing in a place this empty ever truly slept. The mesa loomed behind them, Mara's cabin tucked into the rock like a secret. She had taken the evidence inside less than an hour ago, hands shaking but eyes sharp with purpose. Ruger lay by the truck, nose lifted, chest rising slow and alert. He wasn't resting. He was listening. Cal checked the horizon. A thin line of dust shimmered under moonlight. They're coming, he murmured. Ruger's ears snapped forward. His body stiffened in a way Cal recognized instantly. The dog rose silently, bracing himself toward the open stretch of desert. Then the ambush erupted. Headlights flared across the sand. Engines growled. 3 SUVs split and fanned wide, boxing them in. Cal barely had time to reach for his rifle before the first shots cracked through the night air. Down! Cal shouted. Ruger was already moving. The dog darted behind a cluster of rocks, glancing back only once to ensure Cal was following. Bullets chewed into the ground around them, sand exploding into violent fountains. Cal slid behind cover, chest heaving. He took 2 shots, forcing one of the SUVs to swerve. But they weren't here to intimidate anymore. They were here to erase. A voice cut through the gunfire. Mason, drop the weapon. Cal recognized it. Not the corporate mercenaries. Someone else. Reeves. Cal peered over the rocks. Reeves stood beside one of the SUVs, weapon raised. But he wasn't aiming at Cal. He fired into his own team. The crack of the rifle echoed across the sand. One mercenary stumbled, collapsing beside the tire. Chaos split the formation. Another man cursed, swinging his gun toward Reeves. Ruger bolted. Cal's heart locked in his chest. Ruger sprinted across open ground, straight at the mercenary, raising his weapon. The dog hit him like a launched spear, knocking the rifle off aim. It fired wild into the night sky. Reeves seized the distraction. He grabbed the dropped weapon, rolled behind the SUV, and shouted toward Cal. Go! Get out of the pocket! Move! Cal fired 3 covering shots and sprinted toward the truck. Ruger peeled away from the fallen attacker and raced to Cal's flank, breath hard, paws kicking sand behind him. They reached the truck just as bullets hammered the bumper. Cal floored it. The tires fishtailed in the sand, engines screaming as they shot into open desert. The moon vanished behind clouds. Wind picked up, full of grit and sharp whispers. A sandstorm was forming. Behind them, engines roared in pursuit. Ruger stood braced against the dashboard, nails gripping the mat, eyes fixed on the rear window. The wind swallowed sound, turning everything eerie and muffled. Cal angled the truck toward an old wind tower, its steel frame silhouetted against the rising storm. The place was a relic, left to rot decades ago. But it was tall, and the climbable skeleton of rusted beams made it the only high ground in miles. "Hold on," Cal muttered. They skidded to a stop beneath the tower. Cal grabbed the evidence backup drive from his jacket. Ruger jumped out first, scanning the storm-lit dark. Shots rang behind them. Ruger barked, sharp, urgent. They climbed. Wind battered the tower, rattling every rusted bolt. The storm swallowed the world below them, turning shapes into ghosts and headlights into blurred orbs of light. Cal reached the top platform just as his satellite phone buzzed. Mara's voice broke through, thin and static-filled. "Data's uploading now. They're trying to jam me, but I'm routed through 3 mirrors." 2 minutes, Cal. Just hold for 2 minutes. Below, shadowy figures emerged through the sand. Cal braced his rifle. Ruger placed his paws on the grating beside him, staring down at the climbing attackers with a focus that made Cal's chest tighten. The dog growled deep, not in fear but defiance. Sand whipped through his fur, but Ruger didn't flinch. The first mercenary reached the lower rungs. Cal fired. The man fell, swallowed instantly by the storm. 2 more climbed. Ruger barked again, a harsh warning bark that echoed in the metal frame. It was the same bark he used when warning Cal of landmines on patrol, an instinctive, life-saving cry. Then the tower shook. One attacker had rammed an SUV into its base. Cal gripped a girder to keep balance. Mara's voice strained through the wind. 30 seconds. Cal fired again, forcing the climbers to duck. Ruger lunged toward one who made it within reach, jaws snapping through the grid. The man slipped, lost his grip, vanished into the swirling sand below. The storm howled louder, like the desert itself had woken to swallow the conflict. Lightning flashed somewhere distant, illuminating the entire tower in stark white. Cal yelled over the wind. "Mara, tell me it's done." A beat, a click. Then, "It's live, Cal. Every file, every sample log, every missing person's transcript. It's everywhere." Cal exhaled, dizzy with relief. He looked down. The attackers were no longer climbing. They were retreating. They knew. It was over. Truth had outrun them. Ruger sat beside Cal, wind tearing at his fur, tongue bared slightly through his panting. He looked at Cal with that same steady, unbreakable focus he carried through war zones and ambush sites. Cal rested a hand on Ruger's neck, grounding himself in the dog's warmth. "We did it, boy." Ruger leaned against him, a silent yes. Below them, engines revved in desperation, their echoes fading as the storm swallowed the SUVs. The desert reclaimed its silence. The world now knew everything the corporation tried to bury. The truth was out, and a dog's instinct had made it impossible to silence. The sun climbed over the Arizona horizon with a quiet insistence, painting the sand in muted gold. For the first time in weeks, Cal allowed himself to stand still and listen. Not for footsteps, not for engines or distant gunfire. Just for the wind. Ruger sat beside him, chest rising slow, ears relaxed for the first time since they'd left the battlefield behind. The dog seemed to sense the shift in the world before the world even admitted it. Justice had begun to move. By noon, every major outlet in the country was broadcasting the same headline. A desert corporation stripped of its drilling rights. Top executives placed on, Immediate leave. Federal investigators swarming a string of covert testing sites scattered across 3 states. More staggering still was the release of the names, the victims of contamination. Farmers, tribal communities, wildlife specialists, entire pockets of the desert whose illnesses were once dismissed as coincidence. Now every name had weight. Mara Delgado's report unfurled across the nation like a controlled detonation. Every file, every time-stamped entry, every toxicology sample the missing scientist had risked his life to preserve was out in the open. Buried truth rarely stayed buried forever. Ruger nudged Cal's hand just as the radio clicked to life with another bulletin. Federal charges recommended. Possible involuntary manslaughter counts pending. Whistleblower protection extended to contributing witnesses. Cal exhaled. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. One update stood out. Reeves Kellen, former private contractor, surrendered himself to the FBI earlier this morning. He didn't run. Cal murmured. Ruger blinked slowly, almost knowingly. Reeves had walked into the Phoenix field office without a lawyer, without backup, without hesitation. Surveillance footage showed him entering with his hands raised, a quiet man carrying a heavy truth. He told investigators everything, the chain of command, the buried memos, the internal threats. And the moment Ruger hesitated to attack him. It was that moment, Reeves said, that made him realize the mission he served no longer resembled anything close to honor. Cal didn't know if Reeves would ever be free again. But he would be heard, and sometimes that was its own sort of redemption. The desert, too, seemed to exhale. Cal and Ruger returned to the cabin site for the first time since the fire. The ground was a blackened patch of memory, only the metal brackets of the foundation still visible. Ash stirred under their boots. The wind pulled thin trails of soot into the sky, carrying away what was left of the old life. Cal knelt and sifted a handful of the cooled debris through his fingers. This place deserved better, he whispered. Ruger stepped onto the ruins slowly, nose sweeping the air with the reverence of a ritual. When he sat down, it was in the precise spot where the door once stood, as if marking the threshold between what burned and what would rise. Cal smiled gently. All right, partner, we'll rebuild. And they did. Not fast, not perfectly, but with purpose. Within 2 months, a new structure grew from the sand. Timber delivered from the nearest mill. Solar panels mounted on steel brackets. A workshop, a shaded veranda, a reinforced cooling room for storage, and a wide, open training field at the property's edge. People began coming. First were veterans Cal knew from old deployments, men and women who didn't trust cities, didn't trust noise, didn't trust themselves. Then came the handlers, trainers, wildlife rangers, a retired K-9 medic who cried quietly when Ruger rested his head on her knee. The center didn't have a proper name yet. The sign Cal carved simply read, Desert Recovery Outpost. But locals called it something else, the place where the dog saved the truth. Cal never corrected them. Rebuilding did something to the land. What had once been scorched earth now sprouted signs of life. Scrub brush that hadn't bloomed in years returned. A pair of roadrunners nested near the fence. Even the soil regained its soft, pale hue. Ruger watched over all of it like a sentinel carved from desert stone. He walked the perimeter each dawn, checking the winds. He greeted each new veteran with a measured, gentle nod, as if assuring them they were safe here. Cal had seen the dog do things that couldn't be trained. He'd walk up to someone silent and hurting, someone whose trauma didn't show on their face, and lean gently against their leg. And every time, the person broke open and breathed again. Ruger had been bred for war, trained for danger, defined by instinct. But now, for the first time, Cal understood the truth clearly. Ruger wasn't built to destroy. He was built to guard, to protect, to heal. One evening, Mara arrived unannounced. She stood beside Cal on the new porch, watching Ruger weave through 3 veterans practicing controlled dog handling drills. "You know what people are saying?" she asked. Cal raised an eyebrow. "That corporate case will go down in history. That you two blew open something no one else would have survived." Cal looked at Ruger. He's the reason it all worked. Mara smiled softly, the desert wind brushing hair across her cheek. "Maybe. But people need heroes, Cal." Cal shook his head. "They need truth." Ruger barked once, sharp and bright, as if casting his vote. The sun dipped low, streaking the sky in orange and violet. The desert breathed deep, alive again, holding space for the men, the dogs, and the ghosts learning to rest. Cal placed a hand on Ruger's back. "We did good, boy." Ruger leaned into him, warm and steady. And for the first time since the hatch opened beneath the frozen sand, Cal felt the weight of what they'd carried finally, quietly lift. The desert morning carried a gentler kind of heat, the kind that warmed slowly instead of burning. Cal stood on the porch of the Desert Recovery Outpost, watching a group of middle school students file through the gate with the cautious excitement of kids stepping into a place that felt bigger than they were prepared for. Ruger lay in a patch of sunlight near the steps, his coat now streaked with silver around the muzzle. Age had settled into him the way the desert did after a storm, quiet and dignified. But his eyes, those sharp amber eyes, still held the same alert brightness as the night he saved Cal's life. The VA coordinator introduced Cal as the founder, and Ruger as the heart of the program. The kids clustered around in a loose semicircle, staring at Ruger with wide, reverent curiosity. One boy stepped forward. He was small, freckles across his nose, eyes carrying the careful weight of someone who thought before speaking. "Sir," he asked, "why did Ruger find the hatch when no one else could?" Cal looked down at Ruger. The dog blinked up at him, slow and knowing, as if they had rehearsed this moment without saying a word. Cal crouched beside him. "Because," Cal said softly, "he didn't bark for danger. He barked for the truth." The boy nodded, though Cal doubted he understood the full meaning. Maybe that was the point. Truth didn't need to be understood all at once. It needed to be carried piece by piece, like they carried the evidence from the desert and built something new out of it. Another girl raised her hand. "Is it true Ruger saved you in a fire?" Cal smiled. "Ruger saved me a lot more times than that." Ruger stretched, slow and deliberate, before settling his head back into the sand. The desert breeze rustled the cactus spines nearby, sending a soft hush across the yard. Cal led the group down the walkway, past the training field where 2 veterans practiced quiet walking exercises with rescue shepherds. One of the dogs lifted its head at Ruger, then returned to its task. Cal explained how trauma rewired the instincts, how dogs helped veterans relearn the rhythm of safety. But the kids kept looking back at Ruger. As if sensing their attention, Ruger rose and padded over to a bench where a shy girl sat alone, notebook pressed against her chest. She froze as the shepherd approached. Ruger sat beside her without touching her, giving her space to choose. After a long moment, she tentatively set her hand on his fur. Ruger leaned in, just enough. The girl's shoulders softened. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Cal watched with a quiet ache in his chest. Ruger didn't just protect. He restored. When the tour ended, the sun stood high above the ridge, casting long shadows across the outpost. The VA coordinator thanked Cal, then herded the kids toward the vans. But one boy lingered. He stared at Ruger for a long moment before speaking. "Do dogs really know things people don't?" Cal considered the question. The desert wind swept across the sand, warm and steady. "They know what we forget to feel," he said. Ruger trotted up, brushing lightly against Cal's leg. Cal placed a hand on Ruger's back. "This land healed because someone listened," Cal said. "Not to orders, not to fear, but to instinct, to truth." The boy nodded hard, as if memorizing the words, then jogged to rejoin the others. The vans pulled away, kicking dust into the air that caught the sunlight like floating embers. Ruger climbed onto the porch and curled beside Cal's boots, gazing across the desert that had once held its breath under buried secrets. Now it breathed freely, wind sweeping over the dunes like a promise kept. Cal lowered himself beside his partner. "We made it out, boy," he whispered, "and we made it count." Ruger closed his eyes, but his ears flicked, always. Listening, always guarding. Cal looked straight towards the horizon. "If anyone ever asks how the desert changed," he said quietly, "tell them a dog found the truth buried under frozen sand." Ruger huffed softly, as if agreeing. The camera would fade out there. On a man, a dog, and a desert that finally knew peace. Then a single question rose, almost carried by the wind itself. "What's your story with a loyal pet? If you've ever been saved by instinct or steadied by four paws beside you, you already know how much truth a dog can hold. Support our mission. Share the story. Honor the ones who never stopped guarding. Subscribe to German Shepherd, where loyalty lives.